What if I told you that hidden deep in the jungle lies a story more dangerous than any treasure and more powerful than any king? A story where pride and greed clash against love and destiny, and only one law decides who survives, the law of the jungle. Here the elephants walk as giants of memory, the wolves run as silent shadows, and the tiger Shere Khan rules as the unchallenged sovereign. Yet within this world of fang and claw, destiny weaves the life of a child. A boy who will rise to become more than a man, the very voice of the jungle itself. His name is Mowgli. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable journey, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps stories like this alive. From the moment they first opened their eyes, two children shared a bond written in sorrow and sealed in destiny. Kit, the daughter of explorers, and Mowgli, the boy of the jungle, both entered this world as their mothers left it. Loss became the seed of their connection, and the wild became the cradle of their souls. Raised beneath the endless canopy, Mowgli learned not from books or schools, but from the whispers of the wind and the roars of beasts. The jungle spoke, and he listened. Kit, though from a world of men, felt that same pull in her heart, as if her spirit too belonged to the wilderness. Together they were not just children. They were fragments of two worlds that should never have touched, and yet were bound together by fate itself. What if two lives, born in different worlds, were tied together by the same wound? On the very day that Mowgli took his first breath, the jungle claimed his mother. Far away, Kit, the daughter of explorers, entered this world under the same shadow of loss. Their mothers were gone, and in that emptiness, destiny planted a seed. Mowgli's cradle was not a home with walls, but the soil of the earth. His lullabies were the howls of wolves, the songs of birds, and the deep growl of predators announcing their rule. To him, every rustle of leaves had meaning, every roar carried wisdom. He was not taught by men, he was shaped by the wild. Kit, on the other hand, grew under her father's watch, surrounded by books, maps, and the disciplined voices of the British colony. And yet, she always felt something calling her beyond the fences and forts. She felt the jungle whisper her name, as if a hidden part of her belonged to that untamed world. From the moment they first met, their connection was undeniable. They were children of sorrow, yet united by something greater, a silent understanding that life is fragile and that love in all its forms is what gives meaning to survival. Though one was destined for the pathways of civilization and the other for the shadows of the jungle, fate had woven their stories together, and neither of them could escape it. Every kingdom has its ruler. In the jungle, that ruler was not a man on a throne, but a predator whose very presence sent silence rippling through the trees. His name was Shere Khan, the king of tigers, the terror of the wild. With eyes like burning embers and stripes carved by nature's own hand, Shere Khan was more than a beast. He was the living embodiment of the jungle's law. To the deer, he was death. To the wolves, he was fear. And to men, he was a warning. This land does not belong to you. Hunters had come with their guns, greedy for skins, ivory, and trophies. But the jungle never forgets, and neither did Shere Khan. He stalked them not out of hunger, but out of vengeance. For every life they took in arrogance, he vowed to repay in blood. And yet destiny whispered another truth. The paths of Shere Khan and Mowgli were bound to collide. One, the sovereign of tooth and claw. The other, a boy marked by fate, walking between two worlds. One would rule by fear, the other by love and courage. The jungle was watching, the balance was shifting, and soon the law of the wild would be tested in fire and fang. It happened on a day when the jungle seemed alive with warnings. The birds flew restless, the monkeys shrieked from the treetops, and even the elephants moved uneasily, as if the earth itself trembled. Something was coming. The hunters had gone too far. They had spilled blood not for survival, but for sport. Shere Khan, the tiger sovereign, had returned with fury burning in his chest. His roars split the silence like thunder, echoing through every valley, reminding all that the law of the jungle had been broken. In the chaos, Mowgli, still only a boy, found himself face to face with the very beast whose name terrified even the bravest men. His heart pounded like a war drum, but in his eyes there was no hatred, only a reflection of the same wild spirit. The clash was inevitable. Guns fired, men shouted, animals scattered in fear. And in that storm of sound and fury, Mowgli vanished. To those who searched for him, there was only despair. To his father's eyes, there was only the certainty of death. But the jungle had not taken him to destroy him. It had claimed him as its own. From that day forward, the boy was no longer a child of men, but a child of the wild. Years passed, and whispers began to spread across villages and camps. A shadow moved through the jungle. A figure faster than the wolves, stronger than the panthers, and braver than the elephants. Some called him a spirit, others a curse. But the truth was far more astonishing. It was Mowgli, no longer a child, but no longer fully a man. The jungle had raised him, molded him, tested him. He could run with the deer, swim with the crocodiles, and speak the silent language of animals, the glances, the growls, the songs of the wind. Then, one day, fate brought him back into the world of men. Hungry soldiers chased him, villagers feared him, and hunters tried to capture him. But when Kit saw his eyes, she recognized them instantly. Behind the wild hair, the scarred skin, and the untamed strength, there was still the boy she once knew. But to others, he was no friend. To the soldiers, he was a threat. To Captain Boone, he was a rival. And to Shere Khan, he was the only human who could ever stand against the rule of the tiger. Mowgli's return was not just the comeback of a lost child. It was the awakening of destiny. The return of the Jungle Boy did not go unnoticed. Soldiers cornered him like a wild beast, ropes in hand, rifles ready. To them, he was not human. He was a savage intruder trespassing on the order of men. Bound and beaten, Mowgli was dragged into the fortress, a place of stone walls and iron rules, far from the freedom of the trees. Inside, curious eyes gathered to see him. Some mocked, others feared. But then, Kit stepped forward. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. She looked into his eyes, and what she saw was not a stranger. It was the same boy from her childhood, the one fate had stolen, the one she thought lost forever. "Mowgli," she whispered, and though his lips could not form the words, his soul recognized her voice. The others laughed. "He is nothing more than an animal," they said. But Kit knew the truth. Behind the dirt, the silence and the scars was a heart that still remembered. And in that moment she made a decision. She would not let the world break him. She would teach him, guide him, and prove to everyone, and to him, that he was more than the chains they placed around his wrists. This was not a reunion of chance. It was destiny calling once again. At first, Mowgli was like a storm trapped within four walls, restless, wild, and untamed. He trusted no one, and every attempt to touch or restrain him only fed his fury. To the soldiers, he was hopeless. To the officers, he was entertainment. But to Kit, he was a soul worth saving. Patiently, she sat with him. She pointed to objects, fire, water, bird, sky, and spoke their names again and again. At first, he answered with silence. Then came growls, broken syllables, strange sounds. But slowly, word by word, his silence cracked open. "Friend," she whispered, pointing to herself. "Friend." Confused, he hesitated. Then he placed his hand on his chest and repeated, "Friend." The fortress, once filled with ridicule, now echoed with wonder. The wild boy was learning to speak. He began to mimic not only words but emotions, laughter, gestures, as if the heart he had hidden beneath the jungle's law was now waking to a new light. Doctor. Plumford watched in fascination, seeing in Mowgli not a beast, but a miracle of survival, a rare chance to bridge the gap between civilization and nature. Yet even as he learned, something remained unbroken, his bond with the jungle. His eyes still carried the wild, and every instinct reminded him that freedom was not in books or walls, but in the breath of the forest. Still, each day his bond with Kit grew stronger. And though she was teaching him to be human, she was also discovering something herself, that perhaps the ways of men had more to learn from the jungle than the other way around. Every day that passed, Mowgli's world grew more divided. By day, he sat among men, learning their words, their rules, their strange customs. He wore clothes that felt like cages, ate meals that had no spirit, and listened to voices that spoke of order, law, and power. But by night, when silence fell over the fortress, his heart returned to the jungle. He would gaze at the moon through the iron bars, listening to the distant howls of wolves, the cries of owls, the rhythm of the forest that had raised him. And deep inside, he knew. He did not belong fully to either world. Kit saw the conflict burning in his eyes. She tried to draw him closer, showing him that not all men were cruel, that there was beauty even in the ways of civilization, books filled with stories, music that stirred the soul, and hands that could touch with kindness instead of chains. Yet, Mowgli also showed her what men had forgotten. The law of the jungle was not chaos, it was balance. Animals killed only to survive, never for greed. The earth was not theirs to conquer, but to respect. And he began to wonder, who was truly more civilized, the animals of the wild or the men who claimed to rule them? Torn between two worlds, Mowgli faced a choice that would shape his destiny. Would he walk the path of men with their endless rules and desires, or remain forever the child of the jungle, bound only by the law of survival? Where others saw a wild boy struggling to learn, Captain William Boone saw something different, a rival. He had long set his eyes on Kit, not out of love, but out of ambition. To him, she was the key to respect, influence, and power within the British ranks. At first, Boone dismissed Mowgli as nothing more than an amusing spectacle, a savage pet to entertain the officers. But soon he noticed the way Kit looked at him, not with pity, but with recognition, as if she saw in Mowgli a piece of her own soul. That was enough to ignite the fire of jealousy. Boone began to watch him closely. He mocked his broken speech, ridiculed his manners, and whispered poison into the ears of the soldiers. "He's dangerous. He's not one of us. He doesn't belong here." Yet, the more he tried to push Mowgli down, the more the boy's presence grew. His courage, his bond with animals, his raw spirit, all of it stood in sharp contrast to Boone's greed and arrogance. But jealousy alone was not his only weapon. Boone's eyes burned with a different hunger, for treasure, for gold, for the legendary riches said to lie hidden in the jungle. And when he learned that Mowgli might know the way, his envy twisted into something darker. In his heart, Boone vowed, if he could not control Mowgli, he would use him, and if he could not use him, he would destroy him. Whispers travel fast in the jungle. Around the fires of soldiers and in the markets of villages, there was always talk of a legend, a city swallowed by time itself. A city said to have been built in honor of Hanuman, the great monkey god. It was a place of towering statues and golden temples where pilgrims once came seeking salvation. They brought offerings of jewels, coins, and treasures beyond imagination. But one day, the jungle grew angry. Roots split stone, vines strangled towers, and the earth itself devoured the city. It was said that the gods hid it away, cursing any man who tried to claim its wealth. To the officers, it was just a tale. To Captain Boone, it was an obsession. Treasure meant power, and power meant control. But there was one problem. No man had ever returned from the Black Jungle, where the city was said to lie. No man, except the one who had been raised by the jungle itself. When Boone discovered that Mowgli carried knowledge of this city, that he had seen its ruins with his own eyes, the legend ceased to be a story. It became a map, and Mowgli became the key. Boone's greed had found its target, and the jungle, once again, would be forced to defend its secrets. Mowgli never sought riches. To him, the jungle was treasure enough, the river that quenched thirst, the fruit that fed hunger, the stars that guided his path. Gold meant nothing to a boy raised by wolves. But to Captain Boone, it was everything. One night, under the flickering light of torches, Boone and his men surrounded Mowgli. Shackles bit into his wrists once more. "You will take us to the city," Boone hissed, his voice dripping with greed, "or Kit suffers the price." For the first time, the boy of the jungle felt the chains of man's cruelty, not just on his body, but on his heart. He could endure his own pain, but the thought of Kit in danger was unbearable. With no choice left, Mowgli agreed. The path into the Black Jungle would be revealed, but not out of loyalty to Boone, only out of love. The expedition began at dawn. Soldiers marched with rifles ready, greed painted in their eyes. Kit, terrified but resolute, walked near Mowgli, whispering courage into his ear. Dr. Plumford, caught between duty and conscience, prayed silently for mercy. The jungle did not welcome them. Trees grew darker, animals watched with suspicion, and every step deeper felt like walking into the mouth of a beast. The Black Jungle was not just a place, it was a warning, and those who ignored it would pay in blood. For Mowgli, each step was a torment. He knew the law. The jungle punishes greed. Boone thought he was walking toward fortune. In truth, he was marching toward judgment. The Black Jungle was unlike any other part of the wild. Here, sunlight barely touched the ground. The trees grew twisted and ancient, their roots like serpents crawling across the earth. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp soil and unseen dangers. Every shadow felt alive. Every silence was a threat. The soldiers marched, laughing at first, mocking the legends. But soon their confidence faded. First came the swarms of insects, biting, stinging, suffocating. Then the serpents slithering in the darkness, striking when least expected. So even the ground seemed to turn against them, swallowing their steps in mud and quicksand. At night the jungle screamed. Wolves howled in the distance, panthers prowled near the campfires, and eyes glowed from the treetops, hundreds of them. Sleep became impossible. Fear spread like fire. Mowgli, however, walked differently. Where the men saw terror, he saw warnings. He placed his hand on the earth, listened to the cries of birds, watched the movement of leaves. The jungle spoke to him, guiding him, protecting him. Kit clung to his presence, realizing with every trial that Mowgli was not a savage. He was a guardian, one who belonged to a world that men could never conquer. But Boone, he grew restless. Each step deeper fueled his greed, and the more the jungle resisted, the more determined he became to claim what it was hiding. His obsession was no longer just treasure. It was victory over the law of the wild itself. Yet the jungle never gives without taking, and its trials had only just begun. At last, after days of struggle, the jungle opened its heart, and there it was. The lost city of Hanuman. Vines draped over broken towers, statues of monkeys watched with hollow eyes. And beneath the ruins glittered what Boone had craved his entire life: gold, mountains of it, coins, jewels, weapons encrusted with gems, treasures that once belonged to kings and gods. The soldiers gasped in awe. Their fear dissolved instantly, replaced by greed. They threw down their rifles and filled their hands, their pockets, their bags with whatever they could carry. But Mowgli did not move. His eyes darkened. He knew the truth. This was not a gift, it was a curse. The jungle had swallowed this city for a reason. Gold had never fed a single stomach, never healed a single wound, never respected the law of the wild. And now Boone and his men were repeating the same sin that had doomed the city centuries ago. Kit watched in horror as Boone's obsession consumed him. His eyes burned, his hands shook, his soul seemed to rot before her very eyes. "This is ours," he shouted. "With this we rule not just the jungle, but the world." But Mowgli's voice cut through the madness. "The jungle does not belong to you. Gold does not belong to men. It belongs to death." The earth trembled. The cries of animals echoed through the ruins. The law of the jungle had been broken once again, and now judgment was coming. The ground shook, the ruins trembled, and from the shadows of the temple came a roar that froze every man in place. Shere Khan had returned. His massive form emerged with eyes blazing like fire, muscles rippling with power, and fangs ready to tear through flesh. To him, the treasure was meaningless, but the violation of his jungle was unforgivable. Boone's men raised their guns, but it was useless. The tiger struck with the fury of nature itself, scattering soldiers like leaves in a storm. And then, silence. Only two figures remained standing: Shere Khan, the undisputed ruler of the wild, and Mowgli, the boy the jungle had chosen. The beast circled him slowly, each step a thunder, each breath a growl. Fear would have paralyzed any other man. But Mowgli did not run. He stood tall, heart steady, eyes locked on the predator. He was no longer just a boy. He was the voice of the jungle. The duel began. Shere Khan lunged, claws tearing the air, but Mowgli moved with the swiftness of the panther. The tiger roared again, striking with bone-crushing force, but Mowgli fought with the courage of the wolves, the strength of the elephants, and the wisdom of every creature that had raised him. Man and beast clashed beneath the ruins, echoing like thunder across the jungle. Boone watched in disbelief, realizing that gold could never give him the power Mowgli carried. The power of belonging, of balance, of the law of the wild. At last, with one final cry that shook the heavens, Shere Khan fell. The king of tigers was defeated, not by weapons or greed, but by a boy who had become more than either man or beast. When the echoes of the battle faded, silence fell upon the ruins. The soldiers who had chased gold now trembled, their hands empty, their greed exposed. Captain Boone, consumed by obsession, reached for the last jewel, but the jungle took him. The earth itself swallowed his ambition, leaving nothing but dust and memory. Mowgli stood among the ruins, his chest rising with each breath, his body marked by claw and blood. Yet in his eyes there was no triumph, no hunger for glory. There was only peace. Shere Khan, the terror of the wild, had fallen. Not to greed, not to rage, but to the courage of one who truly belonged. Kit rushed to his side, her eyes filled with tears. "You are not an animal," she whispered, "and you are not just a man, you are something greater." The jungle seemed to answer her words. Elephants trumpeted in the distance, wolves howled from the hills, and birds filled the skies in waves of color. Every creature of the wild bowed in its own way, as if the jungle itself had chosen its new guardian. From that day forward, Mowgli was no longer the lost boy, no longer the captive of men. He became the keeper of balance, the protector of life, both great and small, the one who upheld the eternal law. He became Lord of the jungle. And so his story lives on, not in the glitter of treasure, nor in the power of kingdoms, but in the whisper of leaves, the roar of beasts, and the truth every heart must learn, that love, courage, and respect for life are the greatest treasures of all. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because here, the jungle's voice will always echo, and new tales will always rise.